Christian Parenting.
Well, welcome back to the Journey Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Pitts, and it's just a joy to be with you again. Today I've got for me, a fun podcast. I get to share a friend and a brother. He's not a blood brother, but he's a brother of mine that I really love. And so I'm really excited to do that today. But when Winter died, just continuing the story and my journey, I was honestly in massive need of help. And I didn't really know it at the time, but my winter season had begun. I refer to my winter season as the time that I spent with her. That 15 years of marriage was my winter season, but also the season after her passing would be a winter season for me, just a dark season. It was a season that was dark for me, but in the very beginning of it, I wouldn't say I was pretending that it wasn't, but I was trying to live as if it weren't. And I was trying to live as if it were a spring season in many ways. And you don't know this about me, or maybe you don't know this about me, but I'm a Enneagram 3, which means I'm an achiever. I'm a type A personality. And I would say the way that I live and operate is, I got this. I got this. When Winter passed, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I can handle this. And I wouldn't say I was doing that consciously, or even that I was saying that, but that's just how I operate. And so that was just a tendency I would have to fight. I got this. I'll take care of this. I'll take care of my girls. I'll take care of everything that needs to be taken care of. And the reality is, there was just so much I couldn't handle. There was so much I couldn't take care of. And just a couple of those things. I mean, first of all, we were in a move. We had moved to Franklin, Tennessee from Dallas, Texas, exactly 2 weeks before Winter passed away. We happened to be back in Dallas when she passed away. And so we had a full transition. We had moved most of our stuff to Franklin already, but we hadn't really moved in and set up shop yet. And that was the first thing. We were actually going into a life after her passing that was a new life for us. And I literally could not handle that by myself. Next to that, and more importantly than that, I had my 4 girls, Caitlin, Cameron, Alina, Olivia. I didn't really say them in birth order, and I don't know why, but I had my 4 girls that I was taking care of, and I thought I could handle them as well. And the reality is I couldn't handle them by myself either. The next, I would have Winter's Ministry for Girls Like You Ministries, the magazine she started, and had hired an editor-in-chief to really manage, but ultimately she was still responsible for it. And the day that she died, I just knew that God was calling me to carry that on, to carry her legacy forward. And by God's grace, it has happened, but there's no way I would be able to do that by myself either. And we'll talk about each of these different things. In addition to that, picking up the 100% that Winter carried, like all of a sudden you have her carrying 100%, me carrying 100%, us carrying all this weight together, and all of a sudden she's gone. And that represents so much of life, so many responsibilities that she carried, so many things she did. And in addition to that, just the loss of just the income earner that would be gone. And there were so many different things that I could not handle on my own, but my pride kicked in, and I just thought to myself, I could do this when I couldn't do this. And how that played out, at the very least, I would downplay, or at the very best, I would downplay just my needs. And at the most, I would just kind of actually resent when people would offer to help me. There's a verse that I remember, Psalms 34:18. This is a verse I knew from every funeral I've ever gone to, or every hardship a family has gone through. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." And that's a verse I used to hear all the time. Even my spiritual mentor, spiritual dad, Tony Evans, would say that verse isn't a verse about some spirit floating in Never Never Land. That verse is about God's people showing up for God's people in need. But I kind of resented that because the reality is I didn't necessarily want to be helped, and I didn't honestly understand how to receive help in those days. And by God's grace, he would send people into my life that were gracious with me and would help me even in spite of me. Oddly enough, that chapter, Psalm 34, has been just like a life chapter for me. That chapter speaks to God showing up to help David in a really difficult time in David's life. And there's 2 other really important verses in there in Psalms 34 that I've referenced one of them before. Psalm 34:7 says, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he rescues them." The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he rescues them. And that's literally my story for the last 2 years. Oddly enough, the next verse after that, Psalm 34:8, is my life verse. It's been my life verse for many, many years. It's taste and see that the Lord is good. Simply taste and see that the Lord is good. And that's really my story. My story is one of I don't ever remember a day where I didn't know the Lord, or I felt really, really far from him. There were days where I was disconnected from him, but ultimately I always felt like I was God's. And it was actually in tasting the bitterness of the world when I went to college specifically and began to kind of just tool around with, just the freedoms I had, I would realize that the bitterness of the world was nowhere near as tasty as the goodness of God. Taste and see that the Lord is good. So a lot of meat in that chapter, Psalm 34:8. But going back to Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. That was a verse that I kind of didn't necessarily want to be real because that would mean that I needed saving. And the beauty is that God would be close to me even before I felt like I needed to be saved. And he was close to me through his people, through my sister Carmen, through my brother Benjamin, through our friend Nicole, who's Winter's best friend, and through my new boss, Darren Whitehead, and the Church of the City family, through Tony Evans, my pastor and spiritual mentor and boss up until that point, a friend of mine named Cameron, another friend named Bree. There were all these people and all these ways that God was showing up. But there's one specific one that I want to talk about today who showed up for me. He's like a brother. Before I introduce him, I do want to just share another verse. Proverbs 18:24 says, "One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And I love that verse. You know, many of us, especially us that have grown up in the Christian heritage, so to say, know that verse well, and we think of that verse. When we think of that verse, we think of Jesus and how Jesus is prophetically that friend that's closer than a brother who shows up for us in our great need, lays down his very life for us. And Proverbs 18 though Proverbs is written to everyday people like you and I, and there's some things that speak prophetically, but they're also just true and real in life. That there are friends that can be closer to us than our blood relatives because they show up for us in ways that are Christ-like. That's just a beautiful verse that actually represents my friendship with him. And there's a quote I want to share by Henry Nouwen that says, "The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief or bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not healing, not curing, that is a friend who cares." That's a beautiful quote. That quote speaks specifically of this man, but you may know him from his soaring vocals. You might know him from his 9 studio projects that he's done, mostly around worship, but also just kind of a pop R&B sound. You may know him from his performance and time spent on NBC's The Voice. He was a top 12 contestant on season 2, I think it was. You might know him from his travels all over the country, singing with Kirk Franklin, leading worship on his own projects, producing events with his dad, Tony Evans, or his sisters, Priscilla Shire or Crystal Hurst. But I first met him, Anthony Evans, when I started dating his cousin, Winter. He came to town. I was 21 years old, and he came to town for a Kirk Franklin Hopeville tour. He was a background vocalist on that tour, and I met him as Winter's a little bit older cousin. But little did I know that we'd moved to his hometown about 4 years from then. Winter and I were living in Philadelphia, not married. 4 years later, we would be married with one daughter, and we would move to Dallas, his hometown. And little did I know that he would be like a friend of mine right away, a guy that I would just bond with, and we'd become honestly best friends. We ended up working together for 7 years. I road managed him for a couple of years and ended up managing him outright in his career for several years. He'd become a critical uncle in the life of my girls. And what's really beautiful is, as Winter and I looked back, right before we left Dallas, Winter and I we'd honestly trust him and involve him in really big decisions in our lives. Honestly, every home we purchased in Dallas, Anthony was involved in those decisions. He actually always was pressing me to think bigger, to reach further, to invest greater than I ever thought was possible. And even our home in Nashville that we bought, that was actually one that Anthony would encourage us in as well. Honestly, in addition to all that, Anthony would be the guy that would walk closest with me on the days immediately following Winter's passing. Just a man that was just there for me in my grief. He's a friend that stuck closer than a brother and is a beautiful soul and a man that I'm incredibly grateful for. Ladies and gentlemen, Anthony Evans. Well, Anthony, it's good to be with you, at least over Zoom right now. We spent a lot of time together this summer, which has been a lot of fun, but glad to be with you today. First of all, I just want to say just thank you for your friendship and just thank you for being an unbelievable friend to me. Like over the last, I guess it's been almost 20 years now, which is crazy to say that, but it's been almost 20 years. Yeah, we've walked through a lot together. And I just want to say I appreciate who you are and what you've been in my life. You've meant a lot over different seasons of life. But when Winter died, we were in Dallas. She and I were in Dallas, just kind of wrapping up our Dallas life on our way to Nashville. And you were in LA, I think. Mm-hmm. Cause we've talked about it maybe once or twice, but I vaguely remember, like, just walk me through what was going through your head, like how that happened.
Oh, well, first of all, I'll say thank you for your friendship also, because it sounded, the way you said it sounded like a one-way street. Like I've been this amazing friend, but no, so you have obviously been that for me too. So thank you for that also. What brought our friendship together was Winter. So that's what I just paused because I was just thinking like, thanks, Lynn. You know what I mean? Man,
Yeah. Yep.
that day I was in Los Angeles. Just, I mean, another day in LA where I love fast paced life. I love things, I love being in this creative energy and everybody needs everything right now and you got to get it together and so I was just in another day of that. I remember getting in the car to go to a workspace here where everybody does meetings and getting a phone call from Jerry as I went to that space. And I thought, oh, my brother-in-law's calling. His energy, the hello from Jerry made me put my foot on the brakes. Like the
Mm.
sound of his voice when he said, hey, I just was like, wait, what? And my foot went over to the brake. I just didn't. And he proceeded to tell me, he was explaining in a short way, but the way he was explaining, I was like, it sounded like there's no resolve. It's before he said winter past, the way what he was saying, I was like, wait, I don't understand. It doesn't sound like,
Mm.
but we're here and she's, now we have her stabilized. Like he wasn't going that direction. And so I just whipped my car around and went from, fast paced life on a, creative playground to reality smacking me in the face and reminding me that this is exactly that. My
Mm.
life out here when it comes to what I'm doing. Yes, it's about impacting lives, but a lot of it is kind of the playground alternate reality life. And all of a sudden reality came back and said, wake up. That's what that moment was. I remember turning around, jumping on a plane. I mean, a friend of mine was at my house, staying at my house for that moment. And they were like, they just saw me come in the door and immediately got on the phone with Summer, who works with me in the office, and started working out stuff for me as I packed a bag and just jumped on a plane and came back to be with you and the family. That was the
Yeah.
longest plane ride ever.
Yeah. Man, all I remember, because, that night's really a blur, but I remember that next morning, like seeing you and my twin brother Benjamin, and realizing that I had a brother from basically one from the West Coast and you, and then one from the East Coast. My brother's from Jersey, who basically descended on Dallas to be with me. Just think about that verse, a friend that sticks closer than a brother. Like my twin brother is my blood brother. You're not my blood brother, but you feel like a brother to me. You're an Enneagram 2, you're a helper. You've taken on people as projects. You've taken me on as a project in some ways. I guess we've taken on each other as projects, but I guess when you're doing that, like that moment, that moment when you're getting on that plane, and you kind of spoke to it a little bit, or the moment when you're helping another friend, because I've watched you help friends, and I want to talk a little bit about like what does it look like, what have you learned in that process, but like what is your motivation in that moment? Like what are you thinking as you're doing that?
Well, with you, the motivation is the same that I feel with like my literal brother, like you mentioned, or my siblings. Or it's about making sure that you. I mean, obviously, all of us were dealing with loss, but you had loss, and then the girls and family and job and moving and all this stuff. It was too much in my mind. I was just like, this is crazy. So I had to button up some of my emotions because I'm more emotional, and not really, but in some ways, emotions can break me down, and so I had
Hmm.
to watch you be going through what you were going through and hold yourself up. And I was like, Anthony, your job is to hold him up. Like that's the bottom line, is whatever he needs, whenever he needs it, that's what you are going to be in a magnified way forever now at this point. So that's what was going through my head.
And you started doing that. I mean, I just think about that first week, darkest week of my life, and everything from like planning the funeral. You basically planned the funeral for me. You sang. I don't even want to call it like funeral music. I don't know what you call it, but you did a
Right.
worship service like at the funeral, which was amazing. Probably one of the hardest things you ever done. I mean, helping me find the grave plot and working with the weird vibe of that business.
Hmm.
I'll never
Hmm.
forget you telling me I was all like people pleasing, which is my biggest struggle, is trying to please everybody all the time and just manage everybody's, emotions or whatever. And you told me, I'll never forget. I just think I was sitting in the church's parking lot for planning the funeral, and you just said, Jonathan, do what's best for you and the girls. Do what's best for you and the girls, and everybody else will get in line. Everybody else can figure their lives out. You stop worrying about those people. And that was like, not only did it like speak to me then, but it's spoken to me for the rest of my like right now. Like it's speaking to me right now. Like stop worrying about everybody else. Worry about the things that God's made you responsible for. And you've been my advocate. It's been really beautiful. Gosh, what was going through your heart during that time? Like even like the planning the funeral piece and doing the worship. You actually named a song. Well, you kind of renamed a song on your record after Winter. You can speak
Yeah.
to that as well. But
Well, yeah. You mentioned me helping people in projects, and I'll take it on people as projects and all that stuff. There was a part of me that before I actually worked on myself, I would do that to a fault. I would do too much. I would come in, swoop into people's lives with friends or whatever, and I didn't realize it was an inverted kind of helping them because I was doing it honestly, I was doing a bunch of it for me. I was helping them, but it was so that I
Mm.
felt like I was doing something, like, but at that, so that was obviously dysfunctional. And then also I would hyper extend myself to the point of hurting myself to make sure that other people were
Hmm.
okay. So when I was watching you in this moment, which is a magnified version of that, because I'm like, you have no business trying to make sure that everybody's okay. Like this doesn't, and I know that it's your
I'll never
nature.
forget that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was not. I was
Yeah.
like, I was very much like, yeah. I had to make myself calm down because I was very, and I was, kind of not just at you, but in those scenarios, there are sometimes moments where people aren't necessarily self-aware, so they'll do or say things that ignite something in you. I'm like, y'all don't know him well enough to not say that. He's gonna try to fix it now. Like it's not all your responsibility, but you gotta like you can't say anything you need around him because he's gonna try to figure it out. So yeah, in that moment, I just wanted to in a healthy way be there. And there were some times where you didn't need anything. I was just there without the fix it spirit in me of like, I got to fix it. It's just like, I'll be around. And you knew I was close enough to where you could, I'm in earshot, you know? Um,
Yeah. I'll never forget because, you and I, we've worked together, we've done life together for many years. We've shared hotel rooms for many years, like all that. And, you've got your thing going on, I've got my thing going on, but I'll never forget, like, in that moment, especially the first couple weeks after Winter passed away, like, you were present with me in a way where it made me feel like I was the only thing that mattered in the world, like, literally, like, I was the only thing that mattered in the world, like, you didn't I mean, you had other stuff going on, but you kinda laid it all aside. Yeah, like, I mean, even, like, so the week of the funeral, like, you help plan the funeral, you do a worship service at the funeral, you help me pick the gravesite, you just basically were just there for me, and then when I flew back to Nashville with my girls, like, probably 2 days after, you flew to Nashville. I think you went maybe back to LA for a second and then flew to Nashville, and you basically became, like, this massive helper. Our house wasn't set up yet, like, our house was still packed up because we hadn't moved in yet. You helped me unpack, you helped me buy, I mean, all kinds of stuff, a TV, I had to get a couch, we had to get, like, all these knickknacks that I don't even know how much it cost you, but I think you invested money in my life that I don't even know at this point. You hung pictures, you just did the most. You made dinner for my girls, you drove my girls to school, like, you were just this uncle that went on overdrive in a moment where my girls really needed it, and just a friend to me that just stepped into overdrive. There's a verse, Psalms 34:7, that you actually went with me when I got it tattooed on my back. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he rescues them. And you've literally been that angel to me. And I don't know, I just, as I think about like people that are walking through grief and walking through hardship, we all need those angels. One of the things I want to ask you about, because I think you've learned a lot about this, like, what does it look like to build health around that? Because you're like a helper by nature. It's what you do. But I'm not an Enneagram expert, but helpers, the number two on an Enneagram, what happens is they begin to like resent being helpful. So like, what have you done in your life, like around friendships to make sure that you have a healthy version of that?
well, I'll answer that in one second. You mentioned at that moment, you feeling like you were the only thing that mattered, and you and the girls at that moment. My family in general is the only thing that matters to me on that level. Like, you know what I'm saying? Where
Hmm.
there's a, it's fun to do other stuff, and that's great. Ministry is super important, but at that level, I will shut everything down. Like right in this moment, I'm feeling myself, and I'm like, I will shut, not feeling myself, like feeling myself. I'm just like, I'm connecting with my emotions in a way of like, I would stop everything right now. I would just, that's just the way I operate, and I feel like my parents instilled that in me. But when it comes to outside of that, the helper in me, I had to get to the point where before I do anything for anybody, I ask myself, can you do this and not expect a thing in return? And I have to answer that honestly, because your heart will fool yourself. You know what I mean? Like your heart will go into a scenario
Yep.
thinking it's pure and it's completely not. And there's obviously lots of moments that we're reminded of that in the word. But I am, I ask myself, especially with friends, can you do this? And be like, all right, that's fine. If they don't respond the way that you want them to, if they don't do it, And so
Hmm.
sometimes I'm like, you know what? No, like I can't go that far because I know me and this is too far for me. So I, there was a point where I would not ask myself that question and get myself into trouble by doing too much, or get myself into trouble by investing in people who were takers, who were
Yeah.
just like, great. You're gonna keep doing that. All right. Well, you're teaching, you're enabling me to continue to be whatever I am. I have to balance the line between, are you helping, or are you enabling on a
Yeah.
friendship level?
What was really beautiful for me is, it's the hardest season of both of our lives. So July 24th, 2018, Winter passes away. Um, I guess it'd be March of 2019, less than a year later, your mom's diagnosed with cancer. And then less than a year from then, December 30th, I think it was, December 30th,
Yeah.
your mom passed away. And I was there, my girls were there, and we were just family. And I'm so grateful that we were family and we were together. And the thing for me that I'm grateful for is just as you were able to walk with me through like the hardest season of my life, I was able to walk with you through the hardest season of yours and just be there. Like I remember just not being able to do anything, not being able to say anything. I remember that day, just giving you a hug, you crying on my shoulder, me crying on your shoulder, and just being friends and just being there, and nobody can fix nothing. Like there's no fixing.
Right.
I remember laughing together as we pictured Winter and your mom together. I'll never forget just being at your mom's funeral and just feeling, it's just deja vu for me. But instead of being the guy that was there being supported, I was there as a guy that was supporting. I guess the question is, because it's like, the verse, it's better to give than to receive. Like, what is it like for you to actually receive the same thing that you've given out, And I'm not even trying to compare like what you gave me. Like,
no,
I feel like you gave me way more than I could give you in that moment.
Yeah,
but I'm just curious what it's like.
It's comparable. I just, what you gave me over the 7 years, especially that we worked together, I mean, people may not know that. Like Jonathan managed my whole career. Like a big part of what I do now is because of the 7-year investment that you made in me. And I don't mean just me on a work level. So you have been and have done all the things that we're talking about me doing. You did those for an extended period of time because I was an emotional wreck and ministry was going on at the same time. So you were dancing around all that. But I think receiving that kind of love and that I used to not be able to accept it. But at this point, it's the greatest thing in the world to get that from family and close friends, to believe that you're valuable enough for people to care that much about you and want to do that, to actually not in a cocky way at all think that you're valuable like that, but just to sit in the fact that like, they see that they see the value in me. And once you start seeing the value in yourself, to receive that from somebody else, it makes it a very like healthy and it opens up a gateway for you to experience the definition of real love without conditions.
Yeah. It's funny. I said it earlier in the podcast before you jumped on, like just the reality of like, it was like almost impossible for me to receive without feeling like I had to do something to like pay back. It's like impossible. And now I'm like, I'm better at it. But I think that's actually the beauty of being like totally dependent, is that at points when you're totally dependent and people do stuff for you, there's nothing you can actually give back to them. And so you, by nature of that happening, you learn that you're valuable. Like
Right.
I learned more of my value by watching you and others pour into me, other friends, like other people that just wanted to invest in my life at that point. I learned more about my value in that moment than I've ever learned before, because I was always able to pay back. Even if they weren't asking for it, I was always able to do something, like somehow, make up for it. And so, I don't know, just a really beautiful thing. And the beauty of like having someone that sticks closer than a brother, a friend that sticks closer than a brother, is that you actually, in that, you see, that's what Jesus did for us. Like you see your value. Like when he laid down his life for us, nothing we can do, we see our value. Same way with each other. I don't know, man. I'm just really grateful for your friendship, your support. It's been fun. What's funny is our relationship, we were really close for a long time, got a little bit more distant just because of work and all those different things. And then really it was through Winter's passing and then your mom's passing that we actually really have gotten a lot closer. And it's been through real hardship. And I guess that's maybe, normal of true friendship, just draw closer in those seasons. But I'm just grateful for you and just grateful for the ways that you've spoken confidence in me, grateful for the ways that you've helped me buy houses, all the different things that you've helped me do, but really grateful. So.
Yeah, I'm grateful for you too, man. I when you talk about how the hard scenarios have brought us closer, I wouldn't want to go through any of this again or wish it on my worst enemy. But God, in his divine and faithful way, and I don't break my promises way, has made very tangible, beautiful things out of it. And the connection we have now, I didn't think we could be closer friends than we were. And now I'm like, that's crazy. That even though I don't want to go through any of that again, obviously, what we have now being birthed out of that is one of the ways that there's been some beauty out of the ashes. So I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for you, Pitts.
Yeah, man. Love you. Grateful.
I love you too.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Anthony. Our friendship, our relationship really is a reminder to me of that verse in Proverbs: one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there's a friend that sticks closer than a brother. Just a reminder of what we can be to each other, what we can receive from each other, just like we've received from Christ, but also how we can be Christ to each other. And I want to just share that quote from Henry now and again. I think it's a beautiful reminder of what we're supposed to be when people are in deep need, whether they're in grief or whether they're in loss, whether they are in some kind of pain, or what we can be praying for God brings to us when we're going through the very same thing. But Henry Nouwen says, "The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief or bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not healing, not curing. That is a friend who cares." May we be those friends that care for others, and may we be praying for friends that care for us when we're going through our winter seasons as well. Thanks for joining me, and God bless you guys.